What's happening, fam? John here from AF Anime, and in this video we are going to recap, review, and discuss Chapter 83 of Dragon Ball Super, which is titled Bardock vs. Gas Part 2. And finally, we get an entire chapter dedicated to the flashback between Bardock and Gas, and this one actually has some callbacks, some references, and even some mentions of characters of past. Now, with that being said, this is still an action-heavy chapter, so for the most part, we won't spend a whole lot of time in the recap, but if you want to go ahead and skip it, go ahead and jump ahead to this point to get right into the ratings and discussion. But for those of you who are down for the recap, here we go with Chapter 83. So this chapter starts off with a pretty smooth transition from the last chapter with the standoff between Bardock and Gas and Minato behind Bardock. And the first bit of dialogue that we actually get for this chapter is of Minato telling Bardock that he should probably just go ahead and dip out, save himself, and leave Minato and Granola to their fate. And a shocked Bardock doesn't even get a chance to reply as Gas interrupts, alluding to the fate that the Saiyans have waiting for them at the hands of Frieza. Now, Gas doesn't fully elaborate as to what he means, but the fight continues. Bardock sends a beam at Gas, and Gas comes down with the mace that he formed in the very first page of this chapter. And in anime logic, even though Bardock is taking the blow or the brunt of the attack on his arms, he somehow is spitting up blood in this panel here. To be quite honest, that really doesn't have any bearing on the chapter whatsoever. It's just something that actually caught my eye and just kind of annoyed me a little bit. But moving on though, Bardock gets a hold of the mace and throws Gas a good distance before he tells Minato to go ahead and take off because this is his fight now. And after that, Bardock flies off to rejoin Gas and goes on the offensive, to which Gas responds by saying that his attacks are like pinpricks on Kachin or Kachin Tight. And if you didn't already know, that is the medal that comprised the stage at the Tournament of Power. It is also the cube medal that Shin or Supreme Kai threw at Goku during the Majin Buu saga. It's supposed to be the hardest medal in the Dragon Ball universe. So after that very Dragon Ball specific insult, Gas has decided that he's had enough and is about to step it up a level. And he uses the electricity we saw a couple chapters back to zap Bardock in the air and stop him from moving. Gas unleashes a small portion of his power before we see that Minato has gone back to his house and is now gathering up the Dragon Balls. However, before we can see what Minato intends to do with them, we go back to the fight with Bardock and Gas. And Gas is absolutely putting hands to Bardock to the point where he assumes that Bardock lost his will to fight. And after sending him a threat by saying that he still has a boatload of more power within him, we get the classic Saiyan response from Bardock with him saying that he's not going to run and he hasn't lost his will to fight. In fact, having a strong opponent or a strong foe is just getting his blood pumping. This manages to piss Gas off a little bit. He continues to beat down before we get back to Minato and we see that he summoned the dragon. And his intended wish here was to send Bardock back to his home planet so that way he could avoid death for their sake. And as the fight continues, we see that the dragon has mentally connected with Bardock to explain Minato's wish, and Bardock declines. This is a really cool callback to Goku after he defeated Frieza, and the Z warriors on Earth tried to wish him back to Earth, but he declined the dragon's wish. So there's a little bit of continuity with how the dragons work and the will of the people that the dragons can affect. Moving on though, Bardock re-engages a temporarily distracted Gas who has noticed the dragon, and the fight continues still one-sided in favor of Gas. And in a moment after he was kicked away, Bardock can hear Minato in his head pleading with him to get him sent home to avoid death. And we get the most meaningful dialogue in the chapter at this point, as Minato is pleading that Bardock should allow himself to be saved on the off chance that he might save someone more important some point in the near future. Bardock still refuses this, but after he does, Minato offers him a wish of his own, and his only wish is that his sons can thrive. And he does use the plural form, so he is talking about this guy and Goku, of course. And after that touching line about his kids, Bardock re-engages in the fight, and then we temporarily check in with the other members of the Heater clan, who are noticing the light from the dragon summoning, and before they can fully investigate, the Dragon Balls are sent up into the air to spread out over the planet as they usually do. Now, it is hard to tell from the clarity of the image here whether or not the Dragon Balls have been turned back to stone or if they're still in the original form, so it does kind of leave it up in the air as to whether or not Minato made a wish on behalf of Bardock or possibly even someone else, since the next line we hear from Minato is that he has saved himself from making a bad decision. So more on that potential wish later during the discussion, but moving on, the fight continues and Bardock is still getting rolled up pretty bad. and an exhausted Gas decides to finish Bardock off, but before he does, he embarrasses him a little bit by grabbing a hold of his tail and beating him around a good deal. And this ass whooping is so thorough that his tail even comes off. Gas then uses his ability to create a javelin to finish off the tailless and defenseless Bardock, but surprise surprise, he is saved by Manito, who takes the attack for him. And after a small motivational speech, Gas gets upset and fully transforms into his unleashed power. After doing that, he charges in on the duo and pretty much incapacitates them both with one attack. Fully unleashed Gas then snatches Bardock up by the neck and then begins to taunt him about how he failed to protect anyone. He assumes that Manito is dead. Bardock responds to the taunting by stating that it's not his call to make and he will not die until after he's defeated Gas. So after charging up a huge ki blast, it manages to stun Gas, and then he goes on the offensive and actually does a little bit of work in pushing Gas back, or at least keeping him on his toes. And after pushing him away, we get a little more dialogue between Gas and Bardock. And the dialogue in these scenes is also pretty impactful. I mean, we see that Gas assumes that Bardock is doing this as a form of atonement or as revenge, and Bardock's like, nah, none of that. I just simply beat down whoever I want to beat down. And as the dialogue continues, we get some references and callbacks and allusions, the first of which is Gas getting upset and saying that they don't even have a state beyond the Great Ape, which is a small allusion to the future of Super Saiyans. And on top of that, we even get the Zenkai boost brought up from Bardock himself. And throughout all of this dialogue, we can tell that Gas is getting increasingly frustrated and unstable, as we can see he's even foaming at the mouth at this point, while Bardock is actually remaining quite cool and calm. And this loss of composure is exactly what Bardock needs to go ahead and swoop in and start laying the hands to Gas himself. And Alex shows up just in time to watch his little brother get folded as Bardock uses his signature ki blast to wrap things up once and for all. Now Bardock drops to the ground and nearly passes out from the exhaustion before Alex shows up and begins to taunt him about his fate once again. And when Bardock asks him to elaborate on what he means, he just says nah and shoots Bardock in the arm, sending him plummeting down off the cliffside. Just after that, however, Maki buzzes in to Alex's earpiece and tells him that Frieza's ship is incoming. So what he does is just fire off a bunch of random shots in hopes that he hits Bardock. He doesn't, but he assumes that Bardock is probably on his way to death anyway, so he grabs Gas and then just flies off to greet Frieza for his arrival. And the last 2 pages of the chapter are dedicated to showing us that both Bardock and Manito survived their near-death experiences, and they share a little bit of banter. And after Bardock asks about the condition of Granola, the chapter ends with Manito informing Bardock that he won the fight. So now that we got the recap out of the way, it's time for a rating and a discussion. And when it comes to the rating, I'm going to go ahead and give this chapter a 10 out of 10. And when I first read this chapter, I was actually in the middle of cooking, so it didn't get my full attention or a straight read through, but this second read through, it really sunk into me how good this chapter was, especially considering the things that we got to learn and see from Bardock. I mean, the artwork was consistent and good throughout the entire chapter. Not that that's too much different from Dragon Ball Super as a whole, but we also had a good amount of story when it comes to the meaningful and impactful dialogue between all of the characters involved in this chapter. And normally I would talk about hype, but the fight itself was fairly hype despite it being one-sided for each character at different points. It was just well paced out and well thought out, so just an amazing chapter for this month, easily a 10 out of 10, and I could only wish that this flashback had gone on longer. So now we can talk about some discussion. One of the first things I want to talk about is Bardock's depiction in this flashback, and honestly I gotta say that I really like it. I was worried when they first started doing this Bardock flashback that they would draw too many similarities between him and Goku, which we do get some throughout these chapters, but for the most part in terms of his personality, Bardock is a Saiyan's Saiyan. And I like the fact that they use aspects of both of his kids' personalities to kind of depict him here. We saw that he's got Goku's kindness, but his personality really seems a bit more like Raditz. And that's just a really smart writing choice for whoever made that decision. And speaking of his kids, I also think it's pretty nice that we get a callback to Raditz, and it's not like the Goku show where he just references only one kid because Goku is the main character. He is a father who truly cares for both of his sons. So with all that we got from Bardock in this chapter, chapter, I think it's a very happy medium between the original Bardock that we got to see from the TV special decades ago to the Bardock that we got in the canon in the form of the Brawly movie. I mean, it was a great way for them to introduce this character into the manga while still having his Saiyan traits and Saiyan personality, but having some of the kindness that we've seen from Goku throughout this series. And I'll have more on Bardock in the near future, probably within the next month before the next chapter releases. I'll do a separate video about Bardock and everything we've seen from him so far. But moving on though, the next thing I do want to talk about is the use of the dragon in this chapter, or the lack of. Now, we don't really get an official explanation if the dragon was used at all. My assumption is that it was, and I'm interested to see if Akira Toriyama and Toyotaro will have this wish be effective in any way, shape, or form. And what I mean by that is that it could be possible that the wish itself is the reason why both Raditz and Goku survived the destruction of the Saiyan race, or maybe it might have a lasting effect on Goku hearing all this dialogue. And if it does affect Goku, there's a small possibility that it could bring Raditz back into the story, if not just through dialogue, but maybe Goku might want to fulfill his father's wish by bringing Raditz back. Now, I know that that is a very far-fetched idea considering how irredeemable he was in the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, but there is a small chance that he does have some lingering personality quirks from both of his parents that might make him a redeemable character at some point in the future. I mean, I suppose it's just speculation, but it is fun to think about exactly what that wish may have done or how it's going to play into the story either in the past, present, or future. And that really is going to wrap it up for my discussion for this chapter, as it was pretty straightforward and doesn't offer a whole lot to speculate or to talk about beyond the fight itself, Bardock, and the Dragon Balls. I'll go ahead and say it again, this chapter was amazing, and I'm thoroughly impressed and satisfied with how this flashback played out despite how broken up it was in the beginning. So ultimately, I do hope that we do get at least a little more interaction of Bardock before his send-off, and it'll be interesting to see if he puts 2 and 2 together about the cryptic hints that he received from the Heater clan about the destruction of his race, and that could possibly been what led to him directly defying Frieza at the moment of his death. The only thing I can add to that is the fact that his tail was removed in this chapter, so we have to assume that a good amount of time has to pass for it to regrow before the final events of Planet Vegeta can unfold. But anyway, that is going to do it for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this amazing chapter in the comment section down below. If you made it all the way through this video, thank you very much for tuning in. I'll be back very shortly with some new Dragon Ball related content. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in. My name is John from AFA, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.